Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the flickering dusk of a medieval courtyard, where torches burn low and silk slippers pad softly over cobblestones, slick with twilight. The air smells like rosewater and wood smoke, and somewhere just past, the torch-lit stable's lute begins to pluck a hesitant tune. You glide beneath a stone archway, trailing the scent of herbs and old linen. Candlelight flickers through stained glass above, casting little patches of holy color onto the dusty ground. But down here, on the gravel path, nothing feels particularly saintly. Not with the way her veil tilts ever so slightly. Not with the way he catches it, then looks away too fast. You probably won't survive this. Not because of bandits or bubonic rats, but because the rules of love here are baffling, endless, and wildly inconvenient. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the courtyard of a medieval manor housed somewhere between the years 1250 and 1350 and immediately feel like you've walked into a very slow-moving soap opera. Except here, the lovers don't kiss. They curtsy, and instead of DMZ, they send handkerchiefs embroidered with birds that may or may not mean I think about you at Vespers. It's all shadow play and sidelong glances. A noble woman fans herself while clearly not overheated. Her smile appears exactly when a particular knight walks by, and if you think that's just coincidence, you haven't been paying attention. There's a tension in the air that's not quite political, but not quite romantic, either more like a powder keg of etiquette. It's all wrapped up in brocade and obligation, and you, lucky visitor, are dropped right into the middle of it with no map, no translator, and definitely no immunity to charm. The lady near the fountain adjusts her veil just so, revealing a glimpse of forehead, which, brace yourself, is practically risk in some circles. The man leaning on the carved railing looks down, pretends not to see. He saw, everyone saw, including the chaperone, currently squinting in suspicion while pretending to read from the Book of Hours. Here's the thing about love in this era. It's not about passion. It's not directly. It's performance, ceremony, strategy. You don't fall. In love, you maneuver into it. Historians still argue whether courtly love ever truly existed in daily life, or if it was just literary fantasy played out by bored nobles and desperate poets. But what you see here feels real enough. This is a place where you could wait 6 months to touch someone's glove, and that's considered steamy. And in this courtyard, with its clipped hedges and watchful gargoyles, love simmers like soup slowly, with spice and suspicion. You hear the hush of slippered footsteps behind you, then the barest laugh. A fan snaps shut with the finality of a secret being kept. Someone just got rejected, and someone else is planning a poem about it. You notice? The younger girls clustered near the rose trellises, practicing their smiles, their curtsies, and their subtle ways of dropping compliments without looking desperate. One compliments a knight's banner stitching. The other pretends to misunderstand Latin so she can keep him talking. There are no pickup lines here. There's embroidery praise, glancing admiration of a hawk's training, and sly questions about your favorite illuminated manuscript. Everything's coded. Everything means something else. Someone drops a handkerchief, he picks it up, okay? It's a real thing, and everyone pretends it's nothing. This could lead 2 weeks of subtext, midnight poetry, or absolutely nothing at all. There's no kissing in this story. Not here, not yet. Just a shared look and a vague possibility of it happening 3 seasons from now. Maybe you move closer to the great hall, where music seeps through the heavy oak doors. The smell of roasted meat mingles with beeswax and pine. You're invited to stay. No one says it aloud, but you're watched, measured, and slowly folded into this world where time bends and flirts. Like the edge of a silk sleeve, you pass a boy carrying dried lavender for the table centerpieces. He walks as if he's balancing diplomacy on his head. A young woman emerges from a side door with a carved mirror tucked under her arm. She glances into it once before tucking it back beneath her shawl. Her cheeks are flushed, though the night air is cool. She's hoping someone saw that. And you're beginning to understand this is how flirting works here. It's not loud or obvious. It doesn't shout over the loot or spill wine on your tunic. Tate whispers behind fans and waits by fountains. It shows up as a single stitch in green thread among a field of blue. It hides in the lines of a poem you're not sure you were meant to read. There's a peculiar silence in the courtyard now. That kind of silence where something just happened, but no one's acknowledging it. A night passed a lady too slowly. Her veil fluttered longer than the wind could explain. A moment lingered. That's enough to fuel 3 weeks of gossip and speculation. Remember this place. You'll come back to it again and again, because this is where it starts, not with fireworks, but with feathered fans and veiled half smiles, with unreadable glances and long, slow dinners where everyone knows, but no one says dot. And as the night deepens and the courtyard hums with secrets and sandalwood, you feel it too. The first spark of something sweet and slow and maddeningly medieval. A flicker of a feeling, one eyebrow raised. You trail the scent of lavender and beeswax deeper into the manor, where the heavy oak doors creak open just enough for you to slip inside. And there it is, the embroidery circle, a semicircle of women gathered around a tapestry in progress, their fingers nimble and swift, even while their mouths move with murmured chatter. You expected something quiet, almost monastic. What you get is more like a salon bud stitched. You're not even fully into the room before someone offers you a cushion. You sit, you listen, and quickly you realize they're not just making pretty patterns. These threads carry whispers. Each lady cradles her embroidery frame like a tiny kingdom. Her needle pierces silk with such elegance, you barely notice the bite beneath her words. Someone mentions the knight from last week's feast, the one who danced twice with Lady Cecily. The needle flashes faster. Another woman snorts delicately and knots a red silk thread with a flourish that feels pointed. One girl is stitching a small bird into the corner of her linen square. It looks like a nightingale, or maybe a falcon. Either way, her stitches tighten when she says his name. You don't know who he is yet, but she does. And this bird might just end up on a token passed to him during the next hunting trip. Embroidery is a game board, okay? And these ladies are grandmasters. There's a language here, and it's older than French or Latin. Blue cornflowers mean fidelity. Violets are for modesty, but place a rosemary sprig stitch just so next to a lion. And now you've got a puzzle that means I remember your bravery, or possibly I saw what you did behind the stable wall, and so did God. Historians still argue whether these embroidery symbols were widespread codes or the personal invented language of small circles like this one. But sitting among these women, watching how they glance at each other's work, like reading each other's diaries, suspect the truth is somewhere in between. The young girl beside you, maybe 13, is copying a border of ivy and lilies. She doesn't speak much, but her hands are steady. You notice her glancing at one of the older women every few stitches, as if waiting for approval, or maybe protection. You realize that here, stitching isn't just an art. It's a training ground, a place to learn the rhythms of womanhood, gossip, etiquette, and subterfuge. The woman across from you is working on a prayer book cover, or so she says. But those initials tucked into the vine work, they don't match any saint you've heard of. and her cheeks flush a little too easily when someone teases her about accidentally pricking her finger during mass last week. You lean back on your cushion, eyes drifting across the patterns, roses, birds, crowns, dragons, some realistic, some so abstract they might as well be secret runes. And the more you look, the more you understand. Embroidery wasn't just women's work. It was how noble women left messages in plain sight. A needle becomes a pen. A thread becomes a sentence. Okay? If you're clever or careful, you can say everything without saying a word. You think of the women who couldn't speak freely, the ones promised to men twice their age, the ones kept behind lattice windows, guarded by servants and suspicion. Embroidery became the outlet the whisper stitched into their silence. Quirky detail. In some regions, a woman's worth could partly be judged by her needlework, not just skill, but taste. Your lilies, too bold. Your doves, too passionate. People notice. One wrong motif, and suddenly your tapestry's being discussed by your future mother-in-law with a concerned, furrowed brow. You glance down at your own lap and imagine trying it yourself. A discreet corner of thistle to warn someone off. A trail of daisies for friendship. Or maybe a small, sharp hawk staring left instead of right, because that's how he looked at you last night under the chapel arch. Someone sneezes. Someone else crosses herself. You realize that even in this genteel room of sighs and silks, superstition hums like a second layer of thread. If a girl knots the thread while thinking of her beloved, it binds him to her. That's the rumor. Anyway, probably nonsense, lest it's not. You hear a quiet laugh ripple through the group. Someone's thread snapped mid-stitch. An omen, they say. Everyone pauses for just a beat before resuming, like actors in a well-rehearsed scene. 1. Lady begins a new, square velvet-backed perlage. She says it's for her cousin's dowry chest, but the initials say otherwise. Her fingers pause, hover, then stab the needle through with practiced ease. A few weeks from now, a poor man will open a letter and find this little cloth inside. So we'll understand the pattern, or pretend he doesn't, either ride straight to her father's door or crumple it quietly into his tunic pocket and never speak of it again. But the embroidery circle will know. They always know. You'll linger here a little longer, soaking up the scent of waxed thread and lavender sachets. You listen as they speak about things that matter in code marriage prospects, reputations, childbirth, rumors. But it's all sewn beneath patterns of acanthus and birds. One woman offers you a spool of golden thread and a smile that says, "We'll get the hang of it." And maybe you will. You may not have a lover to stitch a message for. Not yet. But you're starting to see how the game is played. And the next time someone glances just a little too long at your embroidery hoop, you'll know exactly what you're saying. You step out of the embroidery chamber, your fingertips still tingling with the phantom feel of silk thread. The air feels different, now sharper, more alert as if the castle itself is watching. Or maybe it's just the ladies, because now you notice them everywhere. Ladies leaning against stone balustrades. Ladies pacing garden paths in twos. Ladies seated in sunlit alcoves with veils artfully askew. And suddenly, all their glances, all their gestures, everything is suspiciously eyebrow focused. Let's talk about those eyebrows. You've stumbled upon one of the most powerful tools of medieval seduction. Not jewelry, not perfume, eyebrows. Or more specifically, the fine art of having less of them. In noble circles, beauty was synonymous with high foreheads, which meant the ideal flirtation canvas was smooth, pale, and conveniently bald from the brows up. Women plucked, shaved, or brace yourself, rooped their foreheads with vinegar and walnut oil to create that lofty, intelligent look. A receding hairline wasn't a tragedy, it was a flex. You see one woman now, sitting near the fountain. Her forehead gleams in the sunlight, all the way up to the midpoint of her scalp. Her brows, whispered thin, painted faintly with crushed elderberry juice or soot mixed with egg white. And when she arches them, tired conversations happen. A young knight walks by, clutching a falcon. She glances up through her lashes, lifts one brow just slightly, and goes back to pretending to read. He stumbles. His falcon nearly takes off. Flirtation achieved. Historians still argue whether this dramatic hairline preference was strictly aesthetic or had something to do with perceptions of spiritual purity and elite breeding. But you don't need a scholar to see the effect in real time. And it wasn't just about chapit, it was about movement. The single raised brow, suggestion to brows knit together. Disapproval, but the kind that invites correction. A slow blink, then a faint tilt. That's basically a love letter. And yes, some girls train themselves in the mirror. You pass one now, her face close to a polished bronze tray, practicing the difference between archly mysterious and mildly constipated. It's a delicate balance. The cosmetics help. Bit of lead-based face powder for that pale, ethereal finish. Some beeswax salve under the eyes to make them catch the candlelight. A dusting of crushed pearl if you're fancy and willing to risk a rash. The goal is to look like a tragic painting that just barely survived the plague. And then there's the contrast-darkened brows on pale skin. The statement of it. You think of modern eyeliner wings. This is the 1300s equivalent, minus the Sephora loyalty card. One older woman, the Duchess of something or other, walks past, trailed by two attendants. She looks at you in awards and you feel instantly judged or admired. Or both. Her brows are faint, barely there, like fading calligraphy. But her look hits harder than a sermon. You can't help but wonder what happens when the eyebrow game fails. What if he doesn't notice? What if you overarched and now you look perpetually offended? Turns out there's a backup. Gestures.fans flick open. Sleeves get readjusted. Ankles peek out under hemmed linen. A girl near the chapel drops her rosary. Twice. Same spot. No one believes it's an accident. And then there are the secret salves recipes, whispered from chambermaid to noble daughter. Tinctures to lighten the skin, to soften the hairline, to smooth the brow. You overhear one recipe, crushed lily root mixed with goat's milk, left overnight on a silver tray. Guaranteed to elevate your gaze, whatever that means. Fringe. Fact, some women rub their foreheads with pigeon dung for maximum paleness. Allegedly worked wonders. Probably smelled like betrayal. But even with all that effort, it still came down to delivery, timing. The glance across the hall, the half smile, a sharp turn of the head that leaves a veil fluttering in just the right direction. Because one look could do what a dozen letters could not. Could say, I see you, I know, I might even like you. Don't even think about speaking to me unless it's in verse. You try it now, timidly, slightly raised brow at the young man tending the herb garden. He looks up, startled. You panic, look away, nearly trip on your hem. Well, maybe don't try that again just yet. Still, you've seen enough to understand that the real battlefield of romance here isn't fought with swords or songs. It's fought above the eyes. And it's a game you're starting to admire. It's not because it's simple, it's absolutely not, but because of how deliberate it is. The control, the subtlety, the tiny war brows and glances in a world where women weren't allowed to say what they meant, but were expected to somehow mean something anyway. So next time you pass a medieval portrait, look again. See how the woman's gaze isn't quite straightforward, how her forehead gleams, how one brow curves just a little too knowingly. Now you know. The great hall spills out into a cloistered garden where roses climb the stone walls like they know they're being watched. Scent of thyme and crushed lavender wafts in the breeze, mingling with something sweet anticipation. You round a bend near the orchard wall and find yourself in a quiet courtyard bathed in golden light. And everywhere you look, women are saying things without saying a word. Fans, ribbons, veils. It's basically a medieval group chat, except no one's talking and everything takes an hour. There's a girl perched on the bench, lace fan fluttering, gently not to cool herself, but to speak silently. She taps the fan once against her cheek, lowers it slowly, then fans herself 3 times in quick succession. A lady beside her smirks, barely hiding her amusement. You just witnessed a whole sentence, roughly translated. Yes, I saw him. No, he didn't look. Guess I still care. But also, no, I won't be writing him back. In this world, accessories are the language of longing. Let's start with fans. They're more than pretty props, dear. Codified communication systems. Okay, open the fan slowly. Okay, I'm interested. Snap it closed fast. Back away, sir. Drop it on the ground. Meet me by the stables at sunset, but only if your poetry has improved. Historians still debate the extent to which these fan codes were formally taught or simply evolved from shared behavior. But here, in this garden, you can see it working. A flick here, a pause there, an entire drama unfolding with 0 decibels. And it's not just fans. Look at the ribbons, girls, tie them onto sleeves, into braids, around girdles, and every knot has its meaning. Pale green, hope, blue, fidelity, red. You're either taken or dramatically pretending to be. But the real drama lies in how the ribbon is handled, tugged nervously. You're unsure? Smoothed slowly between the fingers. You're remembering someone. It's tossed deliberately into the fountain. Someone's in trouble. You pass 2 women seated at a low stone table, threading new ribbons through each other's sleeves while whispering low. It looks innocent. It's absolutely not. This is code weaving. Gossip in silk, and then no. The veils, soft, sheer, embroidered. Sometimes weighted just enough to fall back with a little flourish, revealing more of the face than is technically polite. You see one now, slipping halfway off a girl's braided crown as she looks toward the gallery window. She adjusts it with a theatrical sigh that even the birds pause to admire. Her veil says, I'm delicate, I'm tragic. I definitely want you to notice me before Aunt Agnes tells me to put it back on. In some parts of Europe, unmarried girls wore loose hair under thin veils as a mark of innocence. Married women had heavier ones, layered and pinned like armor. But there were always exceptions, always little rebellions. A veil worn too far back, a glimpse of temple, a wisp of hair escaping a knot. These things carried weight, militation, by fabric, quirky detail. In some households, veil materials were rationed because of cost, but because the family had a daughter who was accidentally flirtatious. That's medieval, for she knows exactly what she's doing, and we're terrified. You watch one girl casually drop her veil, then take an exaggerated moment to retrieve it. From the corner of your eye, you spot a young man stiffen like he's been knighted. She doesn't even glance his way, doesn't need to. The game continues. Even gloves are in on it. A lady takes off her glove, finger by finger, like she's revealing ancient treasure. She drops it into a man's lap during a feast. He doesn't breathe for 6 minutes. Is this an invitation? A mistake? Accident? That's actually an invitation disguised as a mistake. You begin to realize how exhausting this must be. Flirting here is a full-time job, and you're always one ribbon tug away from unintentional engagement. Still, something mesmerizing about the slowness of it all, the precision. You watch as a lady brushes imaginary dust from her sleeve right as a knight walks by. Bows too low, she nods too slow, and boom, that's 2 months of relationship progress, achieved in under 5 seconds, with no words exchanged. Of course, not everyone gets it right. A younger girl drops her fan at the wrong moment. Another ties a yellow ribbon into her braid without realizing it's the castle color for taken. There's panic, whispering, a silent rescue effort involving one very fast maid and a sprig of rosemary to cover the misstep, and through it, all the accessories flutter, shimmer, and whisper their way through this gentle battlefield. The garden isn't quiet. It's pulsing with layered meanings, heavy with things not said. You think of how today's world flirts likes, emojis, slow fades. And then you look back at this moment, a glance through gauze, a knot of silk, the tiniest movement of a fan. It's almost ... holy, or at least theatrical. Like a play only the women truly understand. You leave the courtyard a little dizzy, not from the sun, from the sheer density of coded flirtation that you now realize. You've probably been misreading all along, and as you pass under a trellis of roses, breeze lifts your own borrowed veil, not by much, but just enough. Someone across the way notices. You keep walking, but not before allowing one eyebrow to lift just slightly. The great hall spills out into a cloistered garden where roses climb the stone walls like they know they're being watched. The scent of thyme and crushed lavender wafts in the breeze, mingling with something sweet anticipation. Around, a bend near the orchard wall and find yourself in a quiet courtyard, bathed in golden light. And everywhere you look, women are saying things without saying a word. Fans, ribbons, veils. It's basically a medieval group chat, except no one's talking and everything takes an hour. There's a girl perched on a bench, lace fan fluttering, gently not to cool herself, but to speak silently. She taps the fan once against her cheek, lowers it slowly, then fans herself 3 times in quick succession. A lady beside her smirks, barely hiding her amusement. You just witnessed a whole sentence, roughly translated. Yes, I saw him. No, he didn't look. Yes, I still care. But also, no, I won't be writing him back. In this world, accessories are the language of longing. Let's start with fans. They're more than pretty props, they're codified communication systems. Okay, open the fan slowly. Okay, I'm interested. Snap it closed fast. Back away, sir. Drop it on the ground. Meet me by the stables at sunset, but only if your poetry has improved. Historians still debate the extent to which these fan codes were formally taught or simply evolved from shared behavior. But here in this garden, you can see it working. A flick here, pause there. It's an entire drama unfolding with 0 decibels. And it's not just fans. Look at the ribbons. Girls tie them onto sleeves, into braids, around girdles, and every knot has its meaning. Pale green, taupe, blue, fidelity, red. You're either taken or dramatically pretending to be. But the real drama lies in how the ribbon is handled, tugged nervously. You're unsure, smoothed slowly between the fingers. You're remembering someone is tossed deliberately into the fountain. Someone's in trouble. You pass the women seated at a low stone table, threading new ribbons through each other's sleeves while whispering low. It looks innocent. It's absolutely not. It's this code weaving. It's gossip in silk, dot and deno, the dot. Veils, soft, sheer, embroidered. Sometimes weighted just enough to fall back with a little flourish, revealing more of the face than is technically polite. You see one now, slipping halfway off a girl's braided crown as she looks toward the gallery window. She adjusts it with a theatrical sigh that even the birds pause to admire. Her veil says, I'm delicate, I'm tragic, I definitely want you to notice me before Aunt Agnes tells me to put it back on in some parts of Europe. Unmarried girls wore loose hair under thin veils as a mark of innocence. Married women had heavier ones, layered and pinned like armor, but there were always exceptions, always little rebellions. A veil worn too far back, a glimpse of temple, a wisp of hair escaping a knot. These things carried weight. Flirtation, by fabric, quirky detail, band, In some households, veil materials were rationed because of cost, but because the family had a daughter who was accidentally flirtatious. That's medieval, for she knows exactly what she's doing, and we're terrified. You watch one girl casually drop her veil, then take an exaggerated moment to retrieve it. From the corner of your eye, you spot a young man stiffen like he's been knighted. She doesn't even glance his way, doesn't need to. The game continues. Even gloves are in on it. A lady takes off her glove, finger by finger, like she's revealing ancient treasure. She drops it into a man's lap during a feast. He doesn't breathe for 6 minutes. Is this an invitation? A mistake? An accident? That's actually an invitation disguised as a mistake. You begin to realize how exhausting this must be. Flirting here is a full-time job, and you're always one ribbon tug away from unintentional engagement. Still, there's something mesmerizing about the slowness of it all, the precision. You watch as a lady brushes imaginary dust from her sleeve right as a knight walks by. He bows too low. She nods too slow, and boom, it's 2 months of relationship progress achieved in under 5 seconds, with no words exchanged. Of course, not everyone gets it right. A younger girl drops her fan at the wrong moment. Another ties a yellow ribbon into her braid without realizing it's the castle color for taken. There's panic, whispering, a silent rescue effort involving one very fast maid and a sprig of rosemary to cover the misstep, and through it, all the accessories flutter, shimmer, and whisper their way through this gentle battlefield. The garden isn't quiet. It's pulsing with layered meanings, heavy with things not said. You think of how today's world flirts likes, emojis, slow fades, and then you look back at this moment, a glance through gauze, a knot of silk, the tiniest movement of a fan. It's almost ... holy, or at least theatrical. It's like a play only the women truly understand. You leave the courtyard a little dizzy, not from the sun, from the sheer density of coded flirtation that you now realize you've probably been misreading all along. And as you pass under a trellis of roses, a breeze lifts your own borrowed veil, not by much, but just enough. Someone across the way notices. You keep walking, but not before allowing one eyebrow to lift just slightly. You follow the scent of beeswax and rosewater deeper into the manor, where the air grows still and the noise of the courtyard fades into distant lute strings. Then you hear it's a soft snip of scissors, the scrape of a thread pull, and the almost musical hum of quiet concentration. You're in another embroidery room, but this one isn't for gossip, it's for secrets. The older woman at the window barely glances at you. Her hands are steady, precise, as she knots a length of pale green silk and draws it through the linen stretched on her hoop. She's stitching a flower, a sweet pea, maybe, but the vine beside it curls oddly, twisting into a shape that looks suspiciously like a letter or two. You move closer. No one speaks. Not because they're unfriendly, because the work here is delicate, personal, possibly forbidden. This isn't just embroidery. This is code. Welcome to the world of hidden messages in thread, where an innocent bouquet might actually be a confession of love, and where a well-placed thorn in a field of roses might quietly say, I miss you, but I can't write. In medieval Europe, floral symbolism bloomed almost as widely as the flowers themselves. A red carnation meant admiration, a columbine, foolishness, a daisy, innocence, or the lack thereof, depending on who stitched it and where. The trick was in the combinations. A woman might gift a knight a small embroidered handkerchief with violets, fidelity, and time courage, framed in clover leaves. Good luck. Totally innocent, right? Unless, of course, those flowers were twisted slightly to the left of tiny rebellion that meant, come back to me, quietly, before anyone notices. Historians still debate whether these codes were truly standardized or just coincidental art. But some preserve samplers, and prayer book covers suggest deliberate communicationists, especially among women who weren't allowed to send letters, and the fringe stuff. Some ladies stitched coded prayers into their hymns, actual words, latent phrases, disguised as decoration. One preserved gown has gold thread Latin just above the knee that reads, Sancta Maria, let me marry for love. It's a bold choice, considering the bride was 15 and her husband was 47. You settle beside a girl working on a tapestry corner. It looks like ivy at first, twisting and curling around a cluster of lilies, okay? But then you notice the way one vine loops into the shape of a griffin's tail, a house sigil maybe. You glance at her and she smiles but says nothing. This entire room is full of those smiles. Messages are stitched into pillows, prayer book covers, belt ends, even gloves. You pick up one left on the benchy, delicate piece of linen with a small bouquet stitched near the thumb. Rosemary remembrance, forget-me-not obvious, and a single black tulip. That one makes you pause. It's rare, risky. Black tulips didn't technically exist in Europe during most of the Middle Ages, but in embroidery, they meant obsession, dangerous love, a warning, or maybe a plea. You suddenly realize this room isn't just where ladies stitch pretty things, it's where they talk to the world without ever speaking. There's a girl in the corner, sewing a border on what looks like a dowry sheet. Cheeks are flushed, and she keeps checking the window. Every third stitch, she adds a knot. Is that decorative, or counting something? You're not sure, but when her friend joins her and murmurs something about the hawk feather from last week, okay? The whole piece takes on a different tone, because sometimes it wasn't just flowers. Sometimes it was birds. A swallow meant, I'll come back. A hawk meant you're dangerous, but I like it. A peacock, flirtatious pride. And a ravenwell, that could mean anything from your secrets safe with me to your uncle is dead. One story goes that a noblewoman once stitched a falcon catching a dove on her husband's sleeve. He didn't understand it. Her lover did. The lover left the next morning. So yes, thread can be lethal if you're fluent enough. And the patterns weren't just for flirtation. Sometimes they were warnings. You hear of women stitching protective charms into baby blanket symbols meant to ward off fairies or bad luck. One even included a symbol said to prevent wandering wombs, which medieval doctors believed floated freely inside the female body like a confused balloon. Yes, really, you take a breath. This world is slower than yours, quieter, but so much more layered. Every piece of cloth here is a whisper, a risk, a hope knotted tight at the edge of a hem. A servant arrives with teeth in, spiced, and probably mostly boiled herbs. She places it beside one of the girls, who nods without pausing her needle. She's working a dove into a handkerchief. A dove looks peaceful, but its wings are outlined in crimson thread. Bold, you're beginning to understand the rhythm, the restraint, the constant filtering of desire through symbols and cloth. Strangely powerful. These women may not control who they marry, but in their thread work, they speak loudly. You rise, stepping carefully past spools of blue and violet. The sun slants lower across the room now, catching the shimmer of silver thread in a nearly finished altar cloth, a tear, and right near the bottom, corner so small you almost miss it is a stitched heart pierced by a sword. Wrapped in a vine of basil, it says, I forgive you, but I'll remember everything. Subtle, sure. Soft, absolutely not. You leave the room, smiling. The corridors grow narrower, the light more golden. You follow the scent of beeswax and dried parchment into a quieter corner of the manor. Stone walls press close, and torchlight dances on faded tapestries. Then, like a gift from the gods of teenage drama, you hear it? Lute music, okay? And the unmistakable cadence of someone performing a poem out loud. You peer into a small room, and there he is, a bard, probably unpaid, definitely underfed. But the man has flair. He stands before a cluster of noble girls seated on cushioned benches, his hands raised dramatically, his cloak artfully tattered, and he's mid-stanza. Thy gaze, so fierce, doth cleave my heart in twain, yet I die gladly, pierced by beauty's pain. One girl sighs, another rolls her eyes. A third is absolutely pretending not to listen while leaning ever so slightly forward. You slip inside, unnoticed. And now, here's where things get interesting, because in the Middle Ages, writing a flirty poem wasn't just a cute gesture, it was practically a contract. A poem meant something. It was the medieval equivalent of a playlist, a love letter, and a slightly risky confession, all in one. The bard wraps up the stanza and bows deeply. The room applauds politely, but one girl raises a gloved hand. "But can you write one in Latin?" she says, all innocence and barely concealed sarcasm. He grins. Can begins again. This time, the words twist and coil in a smooth, sing-song Latin. That would make Cicero blush. Acalae tui sunt ut prune in vino autumnally. Thy eyes are like plums in autumn wine. You nearly choke on the subtlety. Plums. Really? But apparently, that was a thing. In fact, fruit metaphors were all the rage, especially plums, cherries, and pomegranates. Each one walked a very thin line between "I admire your natural beauty" and "please meet me behind the altar after Vespers." The ladies titter. A few blush. One quietly mouths the Latin back to herself, storing it for later. The bard sees this and pivots immediately into a sonnet about lost love, featuring a knight who died tragically after being ignored at a banquet. Historians still argue, he says, with flair between verses, whether courtly love poetry was about real feelings or just highbrow entertainment. But Asef, she's blushing. It worked. You watch as he tosses in names, subtle hints, initials woven into rhyme schemes. He's not writing for the room. He's writing for someone in particular, maybe to someone's, be a whole row of someone's. That's the thing about poets and castles. They're always working three angles. You begin to understand how these poems functioned, not just as entertainment, but as strategy. You couldn't just walk up to a girl and say you liked her veil. You had to compare her to the moon, the stars, a wounded stag, and the Virgin Mary, sometimes all in the same stanza. And if you were lucky, she'd respond, yes. Women wrote back. Maybe not publicly, maybe not often, but their words made it. You pass a scroll half tucked behind a tapestry and glimpse a short verse in a hand. Definitely not male. He sang of my eyes, but spoke to my veil. Let him stitch a name before he drinks ale. Brutal, beautiful, 10 tenths would recite in candlelight. There's something cheeky about it, all this slow-motion courtship in verse. A boy spends 3 hours composing the perfect couplet. A girl reads it, giggles, and quotes it back to her best friend using a mock accent. But then she keeps the parchment for years, tucked into a glove box or inside the spine of a prayer book. Because even if she teased him, he still saw her. Fringe fact. Some monasteries banned certain kinds of love poetry from being copied in their scriptoria. Too suggestive, too distracting, too fun. Which, of course, made them even more popular. Manuscripts containing forbidden stanzas were passed in secret, read under moonlight, and memorized behind altar screens. The bard pauses his performance to hand a parchment to one of the noble girls. She accepts it with a demure nod. Could be a list of verses, or just a blank page. The act of handing it over is the performance. Later, she might add her own stanza, or burn it, or press it between 2 pages of herbal remedies for ladylike ailments. You're offered a seat. You decline, still watching, because now the bard's encouraging them to write their own metaphors. Compare him to something ridiculous, he says. A goose, a turnip. A knight who can't lift his sword. A few girls laugh. One says, his breath is like summer garlic. Another, braver, murmurs, he rode to battle like a sheep on stilts. You adore her immediately, because this is where it starts. This room, this space, this silly, sharp, clever exchange of words wrapped in rhyme, where affection lives somewhere between insult and admiration. And the safest way to say I like you is to disguise it with fruit, falcons, and semi-accurate Latin. It's slow, it's calculated, it's oddly electric, and you leave the room with a scroll tucked into your sleeve, a line still echoing in your ears. Thy eyes are like plums in autumn wine, which might just be terrible poetry, or the beginning of something dangerous. You wake the next morning to the soft chiming of chapel bells and the distant clatter of wooden buckets, proof that medieval mornings do not believe in sleeping in. You stretch, shuffle into the outer hallway, and immediately walk into a wall of disapproval. Not literal, though that might be easier to handle. No, this is the cold, judgmental stare of a chaperone. You've seen her before. Iron posture, hawk eyes, a wimple so tightly tied it could slice bread. She doesn't smile, she doesn't blink, and she definitely doesn't approve of whatever you thought you might do today. Welcome to the underworld of medieval flirting. Supervised interaction. Chaperones, be they aunts, older sisters, paid companions, or resident nuns, or the era's highly trained anti-flirtation operatives. Their entire purpose is to prevent eye contact, silence, poetry, and anything that looked remotely like breathing near someone of the opposite sex. And there's one watching. You now, like she suspects, you've already composed 3 verses and smuggled them into someone's embroidery hoop. To be fair, she might not be wrong. You try to look casual, but that only earns you a tighter squint from her. So you pivot, heading toward the chapel gardens instead. But the moment you do, another chaperone rises like a ghost from behind a herb bush, cloaked, silent, holding a rosary with enough menace to rival a knight's sword. Chaperoning was a full-time job in noble houses. Some ladies brought their own, others had them assigned. These weren't mere babysitters. These were sentinels of virtue, shields of reputation, frankly professional vibe killers. You spot 2 teenagers trying to casually discuss hymnals while standing 6 feet apart. Between them stands a nun, a book in hand, eyes locked on the boy like he owes her money. He tries to smile. She turns a page with such force it echoes. Historians still argue whether these intense levels of supervision were more about controlling female chastity or preserving noble bloodlines. Realistically, probably both. One wrong flirtation could derail an entire inheritance plan, and these women knew it. You duck into a side hallway, seeking refuge, but even here, you hear them. The click of prayer beads, the shush of linen skirts, the faint sniff of someone who just disapproves of your entire existence. There's one watching the embroidery circle now, another patrolling the archery field, and they don't need to speak. Their silence is thunderous. But here's where things get fun, because, of course, the girls find a way. You pass a girl carrying a basket of herbs. She drops it accidentally as a boy walks past. He kneels to help. They don't speak, but for the 2 seconds their hands touch a thistle root. Everything is said. The chaperone sees, says nothing, but scribbles something into her notebook. You have no idea what. You'll probably find out at dinner. There are tricks, loopholes, codes. A common one: I must fetch water. This could mean anything from I'm bored and need a walk to please follow me to the West Garden in exactly 3 minutes, but don't be weird about it. Another favorite: sending your younger sibling with a message sewn into their hat lining, or bribing a kitchen made to accidentally serve bread rolls in the shape of someone's initials. And yes, even the chaperones sometimes play along. Not all of them, of course. Some are truly virtuous and terrifying, but others, they remember, they smirk, they sip wine and turn away at convenient moments. One whispers to you in passing, if you must be foolish, at least be clever about it. Then she resumes praying, quirky, detailed. In some courts, flirting was so ritualized that noble families hired courtly go-betweens, professional messengers who delivered love notes under the cover of poetry, embroidered bookmarks, or recipe scrolls. Some of them were even former chaperones who'd gone rogue. You find yourself back near the rose trellis. A young woman walks by, trailed by a thin-lipped governess holding an embroidery frame like a shield. The girl sighs dramatically and whispers something about how love is just a stronger kind of fever. The chaperone's eye twitches, and yet even here, under this web of surveillance, the girls find their rhythms. They learn when to linger and when to look away, when a smile can pass as politeness and when it's too warm to be innocent, because love in the Middle Ages wasn't just hard, it was a high-stakes dance between visibility and silence, a game of endurance, coded gestures, and waiting for the 5 seconds when no one was looking. You glance back at the embroidery hoop you borrowed. Yesterday, 1 flower, 3 leaves, 2 tiny thorns. It means I still remember, so do they. Later that afternoon, the manor swells with the hum of preparation, fresh linens laid out, the scent of honeyed almonds drifting through the corridors. Somewhere in the courtyard, a minstrel tuning his lute like he's about to propose to it. You follow the sound of footsteps down a shadowed hallway and find yourself in a smaller sitting room, cozy and lit with dappled sunlight. And then you see it, a girl carefully placing a lock of her own hair into a small embroidered pouch. She ties it shut with a piece of red thread and slips it inside a carved wooden box no larger than a loaf of bread. Sitting beside the box is half a biscuit, just half, slightly stale, no explanation in sight. You've entered the world of love tokens. Forget diamonds and roses, In the Middle Ages, love was expressed in a wild assortment of keepsakes, of hair, buttons, ribbons, bits of lace, and sometimes actual baked goods. You know, the usual tools of romantic warfare. Today's item of choice is bread, stale, slightly sweet, shaped like a knot, and gifted after the lady's embroidery practice. The man receiving it will, of course, interpret it as eternal devotion or indigestion. These tokens weren't random, they had meaning. A lock of hair, for instance, was dangerously intimate. Giving someone your hair was the medieval equivalent of posting a love letter on your town's bulletin board. It said, I trust you with a piece of me. Depending on where the hair came from, head, braid, or the secret bit snipped from behind the veil, it could carry wildly different messages. And then there were buttons. If you caught the eye of a knight and happened to lose a button in its general direction, whether from your sleeve or underbust corset, deliberately or not, let's be honest, you were offering him a choice. He could return it, he could wear it, or he could keep it, somewhere scandalous, like a coin pouch or inside his boot. If he returned it wrapped in ribbon, that was a declaration. If he returned it with a piece of cheese, he was just being practical. Historians still argue whether these tokens held binding social weight or were just sentimental fluff. But the number of surviving glove fragments, braided love knots, and faded miniature portraits suggests people took them very seriously, especially since some were kept for life hidden inside dowry chests, secreted in hymnals, or buried with their owners. You linger near the hearth, where a woman gently folds a strip of linen. Inside it is a pressed violets, lightly faded, but still fragrant. He gave it to me during Lent, she murmurs, not even looking up. Said it matched the sky behind the abbey. You don't ask what happened next. The way she folds the cloth tells you enough. Not all tokens were sweet. Some were a little weird, quirky tidbit. In certain areas, girls would gift their beloved. A small piece of their bloodied petticoat hem knot, a whole thing, just a strip. The idea being, I suffer, I am loyal. Also, don't forget me while you're off jousting or having feelings about falcons. Probably best not to dwell on the hygiene angle. And of course, tokens were often exchanged during key moments festivals, tournaments, secret meetings in cloisters where candlelight did most of the talking. You could tie a token to your knight's sleeve before he left for battle. Slip it into the fold of a book he borrowed for prayer. Or, as one girl now demonstrates, hide it inside the hollow of a broken flute. Reed, which is either genius or choking hazard. You peer over her shoulder as she gently inserts a needle-wrapped bundle into the reed's core. Inside is a bit of her ribbon, a twist of dried rosemary, and a note written in ink that smells faintly of crushed berries. You catch only the edge. I still dream of the snow by the orchard. That's shockingly poetic for someone who just stepped on her. Hone him during lunch. Some boys got creative too. There's a tale of a squire who carved a love token from cheese wax. Yes, cheese wax. He shaped it into a rose, let it harden, then passed it off as holy relic art. The girl kept it hidden for years till a rat found it. Romance, medieval, style, beautiful, tragic, and always slightly edible. You wander toward the garden, where another girl is unwrapping a cloth bundle. Inside, a coin, not gold, not even silver, just a worn copper piece rubbed nearly smooth. It's the exact coin her crush gave her to pay for a ribbon at market when she'd accidentally left her purse behind. That ribbon is now tied to her sash, the coin hidden in her bodice. You wonder how many women walked through their lives, carrying small secret archives of love team museums of moments they could never speak of aloud. Of course, not every token meant love. Some meant goodbye or revenge. One girl here embroidered a small strip of linen with the phrase, "You are not worth a candle," then tied it to her ex-crush's horsetail. Everyone in the village knew by sunset. Brutal, iconic, you sit beneath an arch of ivy, watching as the day leans gently toward evening. The air is warm and still. Somewhere nearby, you hear laughter, a girl unwrapping a bundle and finding a pressed daisy, painted button, and a very poorly drawn lion. She hides, her face in her hands. It's the smallest things that scream the loudest. Later that afternoon, the manor swells with the hum of preparation, fresh linens laid out, the scent of honeyed almonds drifting through the corridors. And somewhere in the courtyard, a minstrel tuning his lute like he's about to propose to it. You follow the sound of footsteps down a shadowed hallway and find yourself in a smaller sitting room. It's cozy and lit with dappled sunlight. And then you see it, a girl carefully placing a lock of her own hair to a small embroidered pouch. She ties it shut with a piece of red thread and slips it inside a carved wooden box no larger than a loaf of bread. Sitting beside the box is half a biscuit, just half, slightly stale, no explanation in sight. You've entered the world of love tokens. Forget diamonds and roses. In the Middle Ages, love was expressed in a wild assortment of keepsakes, of hair, buttons, ribbons, bits of lace, and sometimes actual baked goods. You know, the usual tools of romantic warfare. Today's item of choice is bread, stale, slightly sweet, shaped like a knot, and gifted after the lady's embroidery practice. The man receiving it will, of course, interpret it as eternal devotion or indigestion. These tokens weren't random. They had meaning. Lock of hair, for instance, was dangerously intimate. Giving someone your hair was the medieval equivalent of posting a love letter on your town's bulletin board. It said, "I trust you with a piece of me," and depending on where the hair came from, had braid or the secret bit snipped from behind the veil. It could carry wildly different messages. And then there were buttons. If you caught the eye of a knight and happen to lose a button in his general direction, whether from your sleeve or underbust corset, deliberately or not. Let's be honest, you were offering him a choice. He could return it, he could wear it, or he could keep it, somewhere scandalous, like a coin pouch or inside his boot. If he returned it, wrapped in ribbon, that was a declaration. If he returned it with a piece of cheese, he was just being practical. Historians still argue whether these tokens held binding social weight or were just sentimental fluff. But the number of surviving glove fragments, braided love knots, and faded miniature portraits suggests people took them very seriously, especially since some were kept for life hidden inside dowry chests, secreted in hymnals, or buried with their owners. You linger near the hearth, where a woman gently folds a strip of linen. Beside it is a pressed violets, lightly faded, but still fragrant. He gave it to me during Lent, she murmurs, not even looking up. Said it matched the sky behind the abbey. Huh? You don't ask what happened next, Co. The way she folds the cloth tells you enough. Not all tokens were sweet. Some were a little weird, quirky tidbit. In certain areas, girls would gift their beloved a small piece of their bloody petticoat, and not a whole thing, just a strip. The idea being, I suffer, I am loyal. Also, don't forget me while you're off jousting or having feelings about falcons. Probably best not to dwell on the hygiene angle. And, of course, tokens were often exchanged during key moments, festivals, tournaments, secret meetings in cloisters, where candlelight did most of the talking. You could tie a token to your knight's sleeve before he left for battle, or slip it into the fold of a book he borrowed for prayer, or, as one girl now demonstrates, hide it inside the hollow of a broken flute reed, which is either genius or a choking hazard. You peer over her shoulder as she gently inserts a needle-wrapped bundle into the reed's core. Inside is a bit of her ribbon, a twist of dried rosemary, and a note written in ink that smells faintly of crushed berries. You catch only the edge. I still dream of the snow by the orchard. That's shockingly poetic for someone who just stepped on her. On him during lunch. Some boys got creative too. There's a tale of a squire who carved a love token from cheese wax. Yes, cheese wax. He shaped it into a rose, let it harden, then passed it off as holy relic art. The girl kept it hidden for years, till a rat found it. Romance, medieval, style, beautiful, tragic, and always slightly edible. Dusk settles over the manor in soft lavender streaks, and the world takes on that secretive shimmer that always follows candlelight. You drift into the laundry courtyard quiet now, save for the rustling of linen sheets drying on the line. And that's where it happens. A quick scuffle, two figures. One crouched near the wash barrels, slipping something folded into a damp sleeve. You freeze, tucked behind a rain barrel. It takes you a moment to realize you've just witnessed a message drop, a secret note smuggled into the folds of someone's clean chemise. Subtle, risky, deliciously rebellious. Welcome to medieval male flirtation edition. In a world where speaking openly could ruin a reputation, writing secretly became a lifeline. Tiny scraps of parchment, bits of vellum, scribbled in coal or clumsy ink. Most folded tightly enough to fit in a ring box. All of them dangerous. You move closer and catch the barest whisper. Check the hem. The laundry maid doesn't reply, but she smooths the damp fabric over her arm, nodding slightly. And then, like that, the note is on its way to the lady's chamber, writing inside a freshly laundered tunic. Historians still argue whether most of these letters were flirtations, confessions, or political plotting disguised as poetry. But many of the surviving notes from the period are painfully romantic, confused, sweet, dramatic. One famously read, "If I do not see thee at vespers, I shall throw myself into the moat," or at least pretend to. Honestly, same. The mechanics of delivery varied, and you're starting to see how good these girls were at the logistics. A note could travel inside a loaf of bread, wrapped around a spindle of thread, tucked under a dog's collar, or my personal favorite, tied to the inside of a chicken coop door, with a wax seal that screamed, "This is just a grain count ledger, I swear." One girl here uses the prayer book method. She slips a note inside a psalter's gilded pages, folded between the Psalms of Repentance and an illustrated angel who's definitely winking. Her brother, who's not very devout, picks up the book and disappears into the stables. Subtle. No. Effective. Absolutely. You find yourself drawn to one of the laundry lines. It's a set of linens hangs there, drying. Normal enough except for the faint embroidery along the corner hem, a crescent moon with 3 stars. That's not decoration. That's a prearranged code, kid says. I'm waiting by the orchard gate at midnight. Some girls used wax seals, shaped like birds or flowers. Others scented their notes with lavender or cloves so the recipient would know, without even opening it, who it came from. Risky, though one wrong whiff and the message ends up in the wrong hands. Or worse, it's in the hands of a chaperone. You pass a small pile of burned paper near the fire pit. The ends curl upward, still warm, so when either got core, panicked. The scent of melted wax lingers. If you squint, you can make out the edge of a heart. Gone. Now, like so many promises. Fringe fact. In some places, love notes had to be coded in Latin or French to avoid accusations of seduction. Not because the languages were more pure, just because fewer people could read them. So if a note fell into the wrong hands, the sender could always say it was just poetry or a hymn draft. Classic. A girl walks past now, pretending to cough. As she does, she lets fall a ribbon with a slip of parchment sewn into the hem. Another girl picks it up. No words exchanged, just a shared glance. The kind of glance that says, we both know. What just happened? We both know. It didn't. You're beginning to see the rhythm. Notes written during embroidery sessions, folded during dinner, smuggled during laundry runs, and read under bed covers by candlelight. Each one a spark of life in a world that demanded obedience, silence, and modest glances. It wasn't just about romance, either. Some notes carried warnings. He saw you look. Some carried hope. They are choosing suitors, but you are still mine. And some were simply confessions. I am so tired of smiling when I do not mean it. You sit for a moment on a low stone wall, the sky dimming around you. A washermaid nearby sings softly as she folds sheets. The melody is lilting, sweet, almost forgettable except that the last line lingers oddly. When the sleeve is turned, the heart is shown. You blink. That's not just a lyric. That's a signal. You look back to the tunics, hanging in neat rows, and notice one has the cuff turned inside out. On purpose, a message waiting to be claimed. You're in the middle of an invisible network. Letters fly like birds, but no one sees the wings. The moon is high now, the garden still, and somewhere a boy is reading a message that smells faintly of rose water and reads, I dreamed you forgot me, prove me wrong. You step back inside just as the moonlight starts pulling across the manna floors, silvering the rushes and making every shadow a little more dramatic than necessary. Somewhere, a lute is strumming a melancholy chord, one of those medieval heartbreak tunes that somehow sounds romantic and mildly digestive at the same time. But something has shifted. The jokes are quieter. The fans have stopped fluttering. Even the gossip circle by the tapestries is hushed tonight because word has spread. Someone's missed their monthly bleeding. Suddenly, you need to know where babies come from, and more importantly, how they get out. You're gently ushered by 2 older women into a room with lavender, bundles hanging from the rafters, and a faint scent of vinegar and rosemary. This, apparently, is the women's space, the inner sanctum. No men allowed unless they're bleeding or dying in. Preferably not even then. You settle on a bench, trying not to look too alarmed, while one of the ladies, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, definitely in charge, starts explaining things with the grace of someone who's had to do this more times than she's had fresh bread. Here's the basic version. If you flirted successfully, got secretly married, or not so secretly, seduced, and now your monthly cloth stays suspiciously dry, congratulations. You might be pregnant, and here's where things get medieval. Because unlike today, where pregnancy can be confirmed with a 2-minute stick in a commercial jingle, in the Middle Ages, it was a whole affair. There were no tests, no ultrasounds, no bump reveal parties with balloons and mild gender panic. Instead, there were symptoms: sore breasts, mist, bleeding, weird cravings. Someone once reported that a woman ate nothing but figs dipped in mustard and cried every time she saw a goose. Her midwife was 70% sure that meant twins, but pregnancy didn't always announce itself politely, which is why medieval women had tests. One involved soaking barley and wheat in your urine. If it sprouted, you were with child. Historians still argue whether this was based on science or hope. Fun fact, modern studies show it sort of works, which is horrifying and fascinating. Another test, you'd boil wine with a bit of your urine and sniff it. If the scent made you gag, congratulations, you were either pregnant or just dealing with medieval wine. You listen as the women around you start swapping stories. One remembers how her cravings began with charcoal. Another says she couldn't stop chewing fennel. A third just shrugs and says she dreamed of fish 3 nights in a row. And dreams were everything. Dreaming of water. Girl, dreaming of fire. Boy, dreaming of your teeth falling out. That's just stress. You're handed a cup of warm tea. It smells like lavender and despair. One woman leans in and whispers, "No cheese after sunset." It confuses the womb. You nod solemnly, because now is not the time to ask questions. And let's talk about the womb, shall we? This was not yet the age of ultrasound and OB/GYN charts. The medieval womb was thought to be a mysterious, roaming organ that could wander through the body if provoked. No, really, it might float up to the heart, making you breathless, or crawl toward the throat, causing choking. Some even thought it could detach and cause melancholy. That's why women were warned not to jump, laugh too hard, or heaven forbid ride a horse during certain times of the month. You might dislodge your womb, and then where would you be? Another tale includes a woman who was told her womb had traveled to her knee. The suggested cure, rubbing lavender oil in small clockwise circles until it returned to its rightful seat. You begin to understand why midwives were both revered and slightly feared. They knew things, held secrets, could coax a breech baby back into place using only hot towels and whispered prayers. They were herbalists, nurses, and, in some cases, accidental witches. You glance at the young woman seated near the window. She hasn't spoken. Her hands are folded in her lap. The older midwife leans in, places a hand on her wrist, and simply says, "Your blood has stilled." It's not an accusation. It's a statement, when it knows what it means. Pregnancy without hospitals is no small thing. There are no sonograms, no epidurals, no carefully curated Instagram grids. It's guesswork, prayers, and the slow realization that your body is no longer entirely your own. You hear someone murmur, "She need to be confined soon." The confinement room, that's a whole thing you'll discover later, But for now, you sit beside her, this silent girl with secrets, stitched into her bodice and hands that tremble when no one's watching. She's not alone, not here, but she's suddenly part of something bigger than flirtation. It's fans or poetry. This is the part no one writes love songs about, but it's just as real. You sip the rest of your tea, still unsure whether it's meant to soothe cramps, cure curses, or just make your breath smell acceptable to saints. Someone hands you a small sprig of mugwort and says, "Put it under your pillow. You dream of apples? You're safe." Honestly, you'd rather dream of cheese. You wake to the sound of chickens and conspiracy in the narrow stone corridor. Two women are arguing over whether sneezing during a full moon increases your chances of conception. One claims it loosens the womb. The other swears by basil tea and foot massages timed to the lunar calendar. You pause, mid-yawn, and realize you're once again caught in the whirlwind of medieval reproductive theories. Some sweet, some strange, and some so wildly inaccurate they deserve a shrine. You follow them into the sun-warmed kitchen, where the usual clatter of pots is replaced by a more intimate, coarse quiet talk, laughter, the occasional "I heard" from the apothecary's wife, and something boiling in a clay pot that smells like rosemary, old socks, and ambition. Today's lesson: womb, myths, and floating organs. You ease onto a bench while someone slices dried mandrake root with the solemnity of a priest handling relics. The herb basket nearby overflows with lavender, rue, pennyroyal, and something labeled lad's love, which sounds romantic until you find out it's mostly used to delay unwanted pregnancies and keep away moths in medieval medicine. Female body was an enigma wrapped in a corset. Women weren't studied so much as guessed at, usually by men who thought sneezing, mood swings, and wind direction were key indicators of fertility. One infamous theory said conception only occurred if both parties achieved joy. Medieval science, sometimes oddly progressive, often deeply confused. You lean in as a girl explains how her aunt swears by the warm stone trick. You heat a smooth rock in the fire, wrap it in linen, and press it to your belly at dawn to draw down the womb. But nothing happens. You weren't trying hard enough, or your neighbor gave you the evil eye. One woman insists garlic tied to the ankle prevents womb slippage. Another says eating dates on an empty stomach brings boys. Someone else just mutters something about eels and crosses herself. Historians still argue whether these rituals had medicinal roots or were just placebo wrapped in folklore. Some midwives genuinely believed them. Others knew better, but also knew how much comfort belief could bring. You were handed a small sachet of herbs. It's meant to go under your pillow for dreams of clarity. You're skeptical, but last night's dream featured a goat doing embroidery, so maybe there's room for improvement. Next to you, someone's drawing womb diagrams in ash on the stone table. They're ambitious. One resembles a jellyfish. Another looks suspiciously like a snail. Third is labeled the Chamber of Longing, which feels poetic and unsettling. You hear about the wandering womb again, that ever-roaming organ that apparently had the freedom of a vacationing noble. A strong smell, a sudden fright, or an ill-timed laugh could send it spiraling up to the throat, causing breathlessness or melancholy. The cure: sweet smells near the face, foul smells near the feet to lure it back down. It's like a hormonal hedgehog. Quirky tidbit: in some places, women were told to wear specific colors to keep their reproductive energies balanced. Blue for calm, green for fertility, yellow if you were trying not to attract attention from 5 midwives. No one could really explain that last one, but the fear was real. You move to the window where a girl is quietly whispering over a jar of honey. She's dropped rose petals in it, along with a scrap of red ribbon and something that might be ground clove. So womb honey meant to be eaten before bed, always on odd-numbered days. Supposedly makes your dreams more fertile, your thoughts clearer, and your chances of conception at least twice as lucky. You don't ask how they measure luck in these cases. And while all this may seem wild to your modern brain, remember, when you have no ultrasounds, no options, no printed charts of trimesters or tracking apps, what you do have is shared memory, whispered recipes, rituals carried in kitchen smoke and mattress straw, cling to what makes you feel less alone. In one corner of the room, two older women are weaving a charm into a belt. Small herbs stitched in marjoram sage, a pinch of saltol bound with black thread. It's meant to protect the womb from envy and misdirection. In other words, other people's bad vibes. You glance at the doorway where a line of young women gathers. One holds a bowl of barley water, another a necklace of dried figs. Someone's crying quietly, and no one tries to stop her. She might be scared, hopeful, or just exhausted from navigating a world where your future depends on someone else's whims and a few missed bleeds. A midwife places a steady hand on her back and murmurs, "The womb remembers kindness." That's where we start. You exhale, slowly. There's something ancient here, not just superstition or science, but a shared language, one built on gesture, scent, ritual. In story, as the room fills with herbal steam and soft prayers, you realize this isn't just about fertility. It's about community. It's about finding ways to feel seen and safe in a world that constantly reminds you how little you control. You step back into the corridor, his head spinning slightly from mugwort and sage. A girl passes you, her fingers lightly brushing her stomach. She smiles, nervous, brave, curious. Whatever happens next, she won't go through it alone. The corridor turns quiet again, like the house is holding its breath. You follow the scent of steeped lavender and fresh rushes toward the east wings, somewhere deeper, warmer. A place even the gossiping maids tiptoe past, and the loudest chaperones lower their voices near. This is where life begins. And, for a while, pauses. You've arrived at the confinement room. A woman meets you at the door with a nod. Not unkind, just firm. She's wrapped in 3 layers of linen and wears a sprig of rosemary tucked behind her ear like a sword. She gestures you in with a whisper. Keep your eyes soft. Inside, the light is dim and golden, filtered through. Layers of linen hung over the windows. The air is thick with warm herbs bay, sage, mugwort, and crushed thyme scents meant to calm, purify, confuse demons, because apparently demons hate rosemary. A fire crackles in the hearth. Clean linens hang by the walls. Every sound is muffled, respectful, okay? This is the lying-in chamber. The one place in the manor where a noble lady becomes something else entirely, raw, human, and immense. This is where she waits to give birth. She's already inside, resting on a bed layered with soft straw and goose feathers, flanked by her closest women. No men are allowed, not even the husband, unless it's an emergency, or he's very, very persuasive, or rich. This room is a world apart, a world made only of women. Silence, breath, okay, and patience. Confinement began weeks before the birth. Once the belly reached a certain size, the woman would retreat here into privacy. Public appearances stopped. Dancing ceased. Prayers increased. It was a ritual withdrawal from the outside world, transition from wife to mother, from lady to vessel. And, while that sounds noble, it was also a little terrifying, because childbirth in the Middle Ages was no joke. There were no hospitals, no sterile tools, no painkillers beyond herbal tinctures and screaming into a cloth. You had hot bricks, you had lavender-soaked rags, you had prayer, okay? And, if you were lucky, a midwife who'd seen it all and knew which. Saints answered fastest. You glance around the room. In the corner stands the birthing chair, curious, open-seated, wooden stool with armrests and a hollow in the center. The kind of thing that would terrify modern furniture designers. The idea was to let gravity help, while giving the woman something to grip as she brought a new soul into the world. Near it, someone lays out the birthing girdle, a strip of parchment inscribed with prayers, sometimes wrapped around the mother's belly during labor. It was blessed, sometimes kissed, sometimes wept upon, because when medicine failed, Words were the only thing left. Fringe fact. Some birthing girdles were covered in saints' names, astrological symbols, in very confident Latin. One surviving example includes phrases like protege me in part 2, Domini protect me in childbirth, Lord, and even a small cartoon of the Virgin Mary calmly giving birth, surrounded by angels who appear to be offering herbal tea. You hear whispers about mandrake root. Some women kept a carved mandrake doll near the bed for Lakov, holy relic, half fertility charm. The line between medicine and magic here is thin, and no one minds. Someone offers you a small bowl of broth-rich, hot, savory, with marrow and sage, meant to keep the mother strong. You sip it out of politeness, trying not to think too hard about the fact that it was likely stirred with the same spoon someone used to crush feverfew an hour ago in the corner. 2 women are folding tiny linen wraps, no frills, no colors, just soft cloths ready to receive a child if one comes. No one says if it survives, but everyone thinks it. Historians still argue whether medieval women feared childbirth more than death. But considering how often the two were intertwined, it's hard to separate the two. Some noble women wrote their wills before lying in. Others clutched relics or war charms stitched into their sleeves. One even had her favorite poem read to her in labor, just in case her last words needed a little literary flair. And yet, despite the danger, there's power here. The energy in this room isn't fear, it's reverence. Every woman here knows what's at stake. Some have done it, some will do it. All of them carried the memory of their own mothers doing the same. You listen as a midwife instructs the helpers to warm the towels again, to rub the mother's back with calendula oil, to start the low chant that helps time the breathing. It's not medical. It's musical, rhythmic, ancient. The labor hasn't begun yet, but the room is ready. Everything is in place. The water, the linens, the saints. The whispered prayers that cling to the curtains like incense. Outside, someone tucks a note into the doorway, a small parchment tied with green thread. You don't read it, but the midwife does. She smiles, then tucks it under the pillow. It probably says something like, "Come back safe. We need you." You step out slowly, back into the hall, where the world still moves forward. But behind that door, someone's about to do the oldest, hardest, and most sacred work a body can do. And when she emerges again tired, it's hair streaked, but alive, she won't just be a lady anymore. She'll be a mother. You return the next morning to soft laughter and the gentle clink of spoons against bowls. The birthing room is quiet now, lit by shafts of dawn light and filled with the slow exhale of survival. Somewhere in the manor, bells toll softly, marking not just a new hour, but a new life. She made it, so did the baby. And now, just beyond the room of fire, pain, and whispered prayers, comes the part no one talks about in the songs. The after, the gossip, the cradles, the baby charms sewn into sleeves and whispered over in kitchens. You find yourself drawn to the nursery, a sun-warmed chamber, hung with drying herbs, linen diapers, and just enough lace to remind you this child is, in fact, extremely important. Welcome to the Mother's Circle. This is where the real knowledge lives. You sit beside the fire where 4 women cradle steaming mugs of herbal tea. One rocks the infant's waddled tightly, face pink and puzzled. The others are already telling stories, and not the fairy kind. These are real, messy, lovely accounts of what happens after the miracle. I couldn't sit right for a month. One announces, reaching for more honey. My second came out with a full head of hair and an opinion. Another says, my fourth came during a thunderstorm. Still think that's why he won't sleep. And the baby, peacefully oblivious, possibly dreaming of milk. You're offered a seat near the cradella. Carved thing with scalloped edges and a faint stain that might be from a dried plum. Incident in 1287. Inside it lies a protective charm, a scrap of red wool, a clove-studded orange, and a ribbon tied in a triple knot. Together, they guard against the withering, that vague but terrifying thing mothers feared: illness, wasting, the evil eye. Some even placed iron scissors beneath the cradle blades closed, of course, to confuse mischievous spirits. Because apparently, nothing repels the supernatural, like sewing tools. Who knew? And let's talk lullabies. One woman sings softly an old tune in a language that sounds half prayer, half poetry. You can't catch all the words, but there's something about a moonbeam, a lamp, and a warning not to sleep near fairies. You don't question it. Medieval lullabies are gentle spells wrapped in rhyme. Fringe fact: some noble families hired women to sit beside the cradle and tell stories, not just to soothe the baby, but to imprint values from the start: courage, loyalty, piety. Also, never trust a knight who offers you wine before vespers. As the fire crackles, someone pulls out a charm bracelet. Tiny tokens hang from my teach, one gifted by a visiting woman: a seed pearl, a thimble, a tiny glass bead. Not for fashion, for protection, okay? Each object carries a blessing, a wish, a warning. You glance toward the mother. She's resting now, propped against cushions, a cup of broth in hand, and that dazed, proud glow that only comes after doing something almost no one believed you could. The girl beside her is braiding her hair slowly, reverently, like she's braiding a crown, and maybe she is. You help prepare the church cloth, a fine white linen to be worn when the mother re-enters public life. There's a ceremony for that churching, a formal welcome back after childbirth, where prayers of thanks are said, and the mother is reintegrated into society. Some women found it empowering. Others, well, saw it as a polite way of saying you were unclean for a while, but now we're cool again. Historians still debate the tone of it. Some say it was a celebration. Others argue it felt like being benched and then reactivated. Either way, it marked a transition. You were no longer just a wife or a flirtatious lady twirling fans at tournaments. You were someone's entire universe now, and the gossip circle. Oh, it doesn't stop. You learn that so-and-so swears her baby started speaking Latin at 6 months lies, that another claims to have conceived after eating 10 almonds under a full moon, maybe, and that a certain chaperone once helped deliver twins while still wearing her gloves. The talk is warm, unfiltered, and endlessly repetitive in the way that only love and exhaustion can be. You understand now why the women keep coming back to each other, why stories are passed like bread, why secrets are embroidered into sleeves and tucked behind nursery curtains. The cradle rocks slowly. A fresh charm is added, a silver bell tied with twine. Its sound is soft, like laughter from another room. You step outside, just for a moment, and feel the weight of morning settle over the manor. Somewhere, someone's already gossiping about the child's nose. Someone else is preparing gingerbread for visitors. And you carry the scent of rosemary, the echo of lullabies, and the quiet knowledge that life, when it arrives like this, remakes everyone near it. You pass the buttery and the bread ovens both alive with chatter and slip back into the courtyard, where morning has settled into the kind of slow, buttery light that makes everything feel like a memory before it's even over. You find yourself near the fountain now, where a pair of young girls are practicing their curtsies using the reflection in the water. One is clearly trying not to laugh. The other keeps repeating, "Grace, not knees. Grace, not knees, knees." And for a moment, it all feels innocent again. But you're thinking bigger. Now, you've been inside the embroidery circles and the birthing rooms. You felt the heat of flirtation and the cold hush of fear. And one question still hums beneath it all, steady as heartbeat or linen being folded. Did they actually fall in love? It's easy to romanticize the past lace veils, poetic sighs, little notes tucked into hymns. But beyond the performance, beneath the rituals and the gestures, was there real affection? Did any of this embroidery of thy brow's business actually lead to love, the messy, terrifying, warm kind? The short answer, sometimes. The long answer, sometimes and then some. You overhear a servant talking about a lady who refused 3 suitors just because she liked the way the baker's apprentice whistled while stirring dough. He sent her to an aunt in Kent, she says. She whistled louder on the boat. Another tells the story of a knight who gave up his title, his actual title, to run away with the daughter of a falconer. Apparently, the 2 of them now raise birds, bread, and 5 very opinionated children. But love was rarely that simple. Families traded daughters like chess pieces tokens, moved to secure power, land, or grudging peace between rival cousins. Love didn't often get an invitation, and yet, somehow, it still showed up. Historians still argue whether courtly love was a real emotional force or just a theatrical game part entertainment, part escape. It's possible that the grand gestures were more about longing than actual union, that the love poems were less about consummation and more about the thrill of the unreachable. But even within arranged marriages, affection sometimes bloomed. You'd hear of wives who learned to love their husbands after watching them tie shoes for their children. Husbands who began to soften after weeks of shared laughter over burnt stews and snoring dogs. Love that grew not from fireworks, but from familiarity. One woman, curiously old enough to remember 5 monarchs and possibly the invention of spoons, leans in and says, "Shh, you don't have to marry the one who makes your heart race. But it helps if they make you laugh when you've torn your hem and haven't slept in 4 days." And what about the secret lovers? The ones who never made it to the altar. The ones whose names weren't recorded in family trees, but whispered in the spaces between songs. Oh, they mattered. They mattered so much that you still see their names scratched into chapel stones, initials embroidered into petticoat hymns, little pressed violets tucked into prayer books where they stayed for centuries. There are no legal contracts to prove those loves existed. It's just the kind of careful, quiet preservation that says, I loved and I need someone to know. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, girls believed that if you embroidered your lover's name backwards and wore it in your sleeve for a month, he'd dream of you every night. One lady here tried a tan, claims her knight dreamt of her so intensely he walked into a well. He lived, barely. You walk past the stables where a boy is carving initials into a beam. You don't know whose, and you don't ask. Somewhere, a bard is testing the rhyme, "Thou art my plum," so deeply young, and it's going poorly. You appreciate the effort. You find a woman near the orchard gate, tying a ribbon to a branch. She doesn't notice you watching. The wind flutters it slightly, and she presses her forehead to the bark. No words, just something in the way she breathes, like she's letting go or calling someone home. Not all love stories were happy. Some ended in letters never delivered, tokens returned unopened. Others never began, stopped cold by chaperones, dowry negotiations, with a sharp reminder that a girl's reputation is her currency. But even those quiet heartbreaks had weight. They were embroidered into the fabric of life, just like actual fabric stitches, laid down, pulled back, laid down again. Signs that someone dared to want more in a world that gave women so little room to do so. And now you're here, standing in this place between fantasy and fact, wondering what it all meant. Whether the glances and the fans and the dried petals were enough. Whether anyone was truly known in a world that asked women to hide everything that mattered most. And the truth is, yes, sometimes it was real, even if it didn't last, even if it never made it past the laundry line. Sometimes 2 people found a pocket of stillness between the politics and the propriety. Sometimes they touched hands in the kitchen, or met behind the chapel, or carved their love into a tree that still stands, gnarled and silent, but filled with memory. So no, not all medieval ladies married for love, but a surprising number loved anyway. You linger beneath the castle's western archway as dusk eases across the courtyard, turning stone walls golden and casting everything in a soft, forgiving light. The hum of the manor slows firewood stacked, cloaks shaken out, final meals whispered over flickering tallow candles. And as you take in the quiet, your thoughts circle gently, slowly, like a spinning drop spindle. Everything you've seen, heard, felt. You started with a giggle, a lifted fan, an arched brow. You followed flirtation through every side door and chamber of this castle, chasing silk ribbons and half-glimpsed glances. But here, at the end, what lingers isn't just the embroidery or the love notes tucked into hymns. It's something quieter, something human. So many rituals, so many rules, from plucked brows and perfumed veils to woven belts and herbal charms, each one a survival tactic, a hope, a gesture of control in a world where women were watched, married off, and measured against impossible standards. And yet, they found a way to flirt without speaking, to laugh when they weren't supposed to fall in love even when the outcome was already sewn into the family tapestry, to communicate through lace and lavender, through stitches and scents, through eyebrows and breadcrumbs, because medieval women weren't passive characters in a dusty romance. They were clever, mischievous, rebellious. They knew how to wield silence, how to make a wink feel like thunder, how to pour meaning into the smallest act, tying a sleeve just so, choosing one ribbon over another, placing a flower where a lover would know to look. You remember the embroidery circle, the veiled fan signals, the sneezes, seizes, Cynicised inception debates. Remember the charm under the cradle, the mandrake root hung above the bed, the girl who tied a ribbon to the orchard gate with a prayer. Every thread they wove carried meaning. Every glance had weight. Every line of poetry, even the awkward ones about plums, was part of something ancient and ongoing. Fringe fact: there are still surviving pieces of embroidery with strange patterns scholars can't quite decode. Tiny stitched shapes that don't follow any known design, hidden among the more appropriate flowers and saints. They weren't mistakes, they were secrets, messages, sometimes initials, sometimes answers, and historians still argue whether medieval women believed all these rituals truly worked toward, whether they just needed them to. Whether the girl slipping a note into a laundry sleeve believed it would reach her love, or whether she just couldn't bear not to try. Either way, she tried. You passed the tapestry room once more. Someone's replaced yesterday's work with a new scenes, St. Catherine holding a wheel, eyes cast upward. But at the edge, nearly invisible, is a single stitched bee, small, defiant, buzzing where no one expects it. You smile. Maybe it was added by a lady dreaming of someone forbidden. Maybe by a maid thinking of home. Or maybe it's just a joke, a whisper between the threads. We were here. We lived. We loved. And not just in stories. You rest beside the hearth, the fire now just a bed of embers. In the distance, a lullaby drifts up from the nursery, carried through hallways lined with centuries of secrets. And in this flickering quiet, you realize every fan twitch, every sleeved token, every poetic sigh, it was never about seduction alone. It was communication, resistance, creativity, care. And even when the world gave them no stage, medieval ladies embroidered their hearts anyway into cloth, into corners, into each other. You press your fingers to your lips, remembering the girl who burned her note rather than risk exposure, the one who wore her lover's braid beneath her coif, the one who smiled as she plucked her eyebrows, knowing exactly who was watching. They survived, not in spite of the rules, but through them, around them, okay? In the spaces between. So, the next time someone tells you medieval women were just passive damsels or prim matrons waiting for rescue, you tell them about the eyebrow glances and the biscuit proposals, the fan language telegrams, the midnight rendezvous whispered in ribbon codes. You tell them how embroidery could be a battlefield, and how, in the quiet, careful places, women wrote the kind of love stories that weren't always allowed to end happily, but always began bravely. And now, just breathe. Let your shoulders ease into the weight of the blanket. Let your eyes soften, your thoughts unspool, like a thread slipping off the needle. Everything slows now. The castle fades into mist. The bustle hushes to memory. The bells toll only in dreams. The courtyard grows still. The lovers return to their chambers. The chaperones doze in chairs. Even the embroidery hoops rest quietly beside beds. Patterns half finished, secrets half told. Let them rest. Let you rest. The tapestries sway just slightly in the evening breeze, like they, too, are ready to sleep. Every stitch you followed, every whispered ritual, every half-laughed legend tucks itself around you now, like the softest of covers. You're no longer a guest here. You belong, woven gently into this fabric of sighs, silks, and centuries. The flicker of candlelight dims. The voices hush to hushes. So where beyond the manor walls, a nightingale calls once, softly, like a lullaby only you can hear. So close your eyes. Let the fans rest. Let the eyebrows lower. Let the world grow quiet, enough for dreams to walk. And softly, on slippered feet, carrying stories like gifts. You've journeyed far tonight. You've earned this sleep.